Joseph Stalin, the General Secretary of the Soviet Union, born to a Georgian priest, but rose to the ranks of the Communist Party, outplaying other Bolsheviks. He turned his position of a secretary into the final say of the Soviet Union, commanded the Red Army, drew the borders of Eastern Europe, mastermind of the Red Terror, had died. The death of Stalin is a turning point in Soviet history. The aftermath would lead to Nikita Khrushchev succeeding him, but in this timeline, it leads to the early collapse of the Soviet Union. There was some general chaos in the Kremlin during this time period, as there was no plans for the General Secretary was to die, and when the next leader was to be, it was generally assumed that the Secretariat of the Politburo, was Malenkov at the time, would succeed into the new position of Premier, with the first deputy premier of the USSR being Beria. But in reality, the country was ruled primarily by three people: Malenkov, Beria, and Molotov, in what's called a troika. In the coming months, Beria would be arrested by Khrushchev and Zhukov, and then later executed. Khrushchev then proceeded to establish the position of first Secretariat of the Communist Party, resulting in a power struggle between Khrushchev and Malenkov to be the dictator of the USSR. If this sounds confusing, it should be, just like every communist government. But in all seriousness, this time period was rapidly changing, and in this alternate timeline, things go awry. In this alternate timeline, Beria and Malenkov remained allies, but Khrushchev and Zhukov still attempted a coup against Beria. This coup failed with the NKVD troops arriving in Moscow. The Second Russian Civil War had begun. Soviet republics would quickly align themselves. Red means Beria and blue means Khrushchev, with the majority siding with Beria, just like in our timeline. The military districts would also play another large role, as Beria would also have the advantage of having more manpower, firepower, and allies. On the sidelines, during the Civil War, we must also point out how other countries would react. Most Western countries such as the United States, the United Kingdom, and France would support Beria, as meanwhile countries like the People's Republic of China, Pakistan, and North Korea would support Khrushchev. Of course, these countries would not officially enter the war, but it's fact that the CIA, MI6, and the Chinese intelligence department would have a field day in the motherland. By the end stages of the war, China would continue to support the remnants of Khrushchev's army in Vladivostok, essentially creating a puppet state to rival the new Soviet Republic. Along with these, Soviet Union would lose its influence over Mongolia, thus creating more buffer states to counter Chinese influence. And this would most likely come from autonomous republics or oblasts with a significant minority. In the post-war Soviet Union, with the end of the Second Civil War, Beria would be vastly loved by the people, seen as a great reformer and a peacemaker by the West. Beria would remain the premier of the USSR, and Malenkov as general secretary. The liberalization of the Soviet Union would be much more drastic than Khrushchev and would also impact the Eastern Bloc. One of the biggest changes would be the unification of East and West Germany, one of the reasons Beria got arrested. Another drastic change is the release of the Baltic states as nominally independent countries, regarded mostly as puppet states, just like other Eastern Bloc countries. Internally, the suppression of religion, culture would be lifted. Academically speaking, the Soviet Union would be vastly more advanced in our timeline. Malenkov would improve the Soviet Space Agency and require technicians not to be tested on loyalty, but on actual statistics, something that was briefly successful in our timeline. The Soviet Union wouldn't last as long as it did in our timeline. With the new rights given to Soviet citizens and the new liberal reforms, unstable Soviet republics would break away with the states in the Eastern Bloc, starting in 1956 with the Hungarian Revolution, ending with the pro-Western head of state. Then with Polish October, being much more drastic in our own timeline, with Poland completely leaving Comecon and the Warsaw Pact. Slowly, the Soviet Union would lose its influence in Europe and in Asia. With the death of Malenkov in 1988, he would be succeeded by Gorbachev, who would lead the Soviet Union to collapse, seeing a breakup less dramatic and more or less being the last breath of communism. The only country left a part of the USSR would be Russia. This has been What If the Soviet Union Had Collapsed Early? Thank you for watching.